welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdalla. This is book 1 in the Ashes of Avarin series. This review will be spoiler free. First thing I want to start out with is a very high compliment coming from me, and that is that the writing in this book, A Touch of Light, is very, very clean. You can tell that Abdalla has done a very meticulous job with his prose. It is accessible. It is smooth. I never once had difficulty with the writing whatsoever. And this is a very high compliment in general, but this is a self-published book, folks, and it is not an easy thing to pull off, to have such a polished, well-edited book. Particularly if you're a self-published author. So that is a very big plus for me. And I would also say that if you love action-packed books, if you love action-packed stories with really fast pace, then this could be for you. A Touch of Light absolutely has a relentless pace. There are a lot of battle scenes, and Abdalla is good at writing those battle scenes. There also is quite a bit of confusion, at least for me there was for the first 100, 150 pages or so. I was confused, but that's not a bad thing necessarily. I think that the confusion can be a good thing, and I'm pretty sure a lot of that is quite deliberate because there is a mystery at the center of A Touch of Light. There is a mystery, and I won't say much about that because it would be spoilery. But let's just say that you're supposed to be confused. The characters are confused. So you're confused, and you are seeing things from the perspective of 3 POV characters. So it is perfectly fine. I think that it is a little bit difficult to get your bearings for about half the book. And I do think that there is a prequel that Abdalla wrote. I have not read that prequel, so I don't know with 100% certainty that what I'm about to say is true, but I think that maybe reading that prequel might be a good thing in order to just familiarize yourself with the world a little bit first and get some bearings at least, because just getting to know the world is always a thing in fantasy in the first book. And so if you're familiar with the world, maybe the other elements that feel a bit confusing would bother you less. As much as I will say, though, is that this mystery is related to the nature of the deadly foe that turns up at first randomly in the story, and you're wondering what is going on here. But then you begin to see some patterns until things really escalate into something potentially world-ending. So there are high stakes in here, folks. Now, I want to talk about description, because that probably also has some relationship to the amount of confusion that I felt as I was reading the book. And this is part of, I guess, world building, you could say. Now, description is something that we see less and less and less of these days, typically in fantasy, which is, for some of us who grew up on some of the older fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, we love our landscapes, and we love our trees, and, we love these things. A lot of readers these days get bored by excessive amounts of description or lots of description. So I think of it as kind of a spectrum, really. If you want to say Lord of the Rings is sort of like on one side of the spectrum in a way where you have a lot of description, and that can be boring for some readers. Not for me, but for some readers, that can be boring. And then you have other books on the other side of the spectrum which are very fast-paced and very minimal in their description. It can almost feel like sometimes you're in a white space as the reader, and you're just sort of along with the characters in the moment, and the world feels a bit less lived in. So I would call maybe something like Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter on closer to that side of the spectrum. So you have this spectrum, and different people have different tastes within that spectrum that they like. And I would say that A Touch of Light is definitely much more closer to the side that Rage of Dragons is on, where it's got a fast pace. There's not a ton of detailed description in there. So a lot is just in the mind of the reader. And so, honestly, a lot of the stuff is just happening so fast that you're not thinking a lot about the landscape or the cityscape or things of that nature. So just if that's your type of thing and you love fast, action-paced books, without a lot of description, you probably will enjoy A Touch of Light. If, on the other hand, you really prefer, or you're in the mood for, because people can love both, frankly. You can be in the mood for a much slower paced, more descriptive book, or you could be in the mood for a fast-paced thriller that you don't want to dwell too much on the forests and the trees. Then this one, A Touch of Light, falls really more under that category, I would say. Also, the characters. There are some great characters in here. There's some really memorable ones, I would say. There are 3 POV characters I said earlier, though, that I will focus on for the moment. Adrian is a prince who is in a situation where he is on a quest that could potentially get him in some trouble. Let's just say it that way. I'm trying to avoid spoilers once again, but he is in some ways going against the religion of his place, the Domain. The Domain is a bunch of kingdoms that have sort of come together, at least in name, under one broad sort of entity. Not exactly an empire, because there's much more freedom for each individual kingdom within this alliance, I guess you could call it. But they do share a religion. And this religion is all about worship of life and avoidance of the topic of death. Death is bad. You don't talk about dead people. That's a thing in the Domain. Adrian is someone who is a bit of a heretic in this respect, because he is thrown into a situation that makes him confront this particular aspect of his culture and religion. And he makes some interesting decisions along the way. Frankly, for somebody his age, he makes several kind of boneheaded decisions, but where would fantasy plots be without a character making boneheaded decisions? So that's Adrian. My favorite character in the book is, without a doubt, Lynn. She is a kind of without getting into spoilers again, I'll call her a sort of a paladin-like character who is very much related to the magic of the Domain. And she is someone who is given a lot of conflict. She is put in a situation where she is someone as well who is at odds with the received wisdom of the society because of her unique experiences. She has seen things that her peers have not seen. She has experienced losses and encountered disturbing matters, and all of this adds up to her being also a bit of a heretic, a bit of a maverick figure. So that is something that these perspective characters definitely have in common. All 3 of them are misfits of a sort. They are running counter to the doctrines of their society. And that makes them interesting. That makes them, I think, what Thiago Abdalla is doing with these characters is pretty good. I like this. I like the fact that he is exploring religion and he is looking into what happens to people who fall out of favor, who no longer conform and can, in that way, stick out. The last of the perspective characters is Nasha, and she is from outside of the Domain, from the clans that live outside of the Domain. They have a very different culture and a different religion. And instead of denial of death, they see death as something as necessary, that it is necessary for the continuation of the life on the land. And so you can see where that perspective would put them at odds with the predominant perspective in the Domain. And it is interesting to see these different 3 threads. It was kind of nice to be able to actually switch between the POVs as the book progressed. And going back to the themes again, the religion is really something that I enjoyed in this story. It is a thing that I hope that Abdalla will develop even more in the future books, because I think that is, for me, the most fascinating part of this read, is to look at this perspective on death and how it's intertwined with the religion and where it's gotten this culture. And I think it has a lot to do with that mystery I was alluding to earlier as well, so it'll be interesting to see what he does with that, how that develops. But much of the story is focused around this theme of religion intertwined with death, how we think of death, how we deal with it, how we encounter our own grief. And it is very interesting to see these different perspectives. There's even another perspective besides that of the domain and the clans outside the domain. There's another continent called Azur, and they have yet another way of seeing death, a different religion. Then that is brought into the story more toward the end of it. And so I think it's really cool to have these various perspectives brought in here. Another thing that I think has great potential in this book, A Touch of Light, is the magic. And I love how, at least in part, it seems to be empathic in nature. There's a lot about being in tune with other people's emotions and being haunted by other people and other minds. So there's something really cool about that I find compelling. I'm not quite sure I understand the magic system yet, but I want to understand more about it. And so I'm confused but curious, and that's probably a good place for me to be so that I have something to look forward to as the series progresses. And speaking of that, I am definitely looking forward to seeing what Abdalla does with this series. I'm very intrigued, as I said, about the religious aspects of it, the magical aspects of it. I'd love to see him dwell a little more on that, maybe some more quiet moments amidst all these battle scenes so that I feel a little more connected to these characters. I absolutely love Lynn, though. I think I find her arc to be incredibly compelling. So there's a lot of rich material there that I hope to see him build on. That's it from me for now. Until next time.